Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Devin, Hasson, and David Wolman. The band's back together this week, Devin. Glad to see that you're feeling better this week. So, gentlemen, let's talk a little high school football. As is tradition to lead off the week, it is Monday, a little after 11 a.m., and we're here to recap some of the happenings from Week 4. So right now, I guess by this time at the end of the week, everybody that we cover will be playing their district schedules. So any buys that were taken care of were cast aside last week. So now that we've had a chance to, I guess, get ready for that district grind, let's just kind of assess where things are at right now. We can kind of start just by simply recapping what we saw last week as far as some notable takeaways from our games on Thursday and Friday. David, let's just get right into District 7-5A Division 2 because they are right in the thick of things. Yeah. That big old 9-team behemoth of a district, and you've got a couple early statements being made by a couple teams out in Frisco. We could talk about one of them that you saw on Friday in Lebanon Trail as they put forth a pretty impressive effort against Lake Dallas. So Lebanon Trail 4-0. Who'd have thought the Trailblazers in just their third year as a varsity program
making a big step this year?
Talk a bit about just their performance against Lake Dallas and just what kind of has caught your eye about the way Lebanon Trail's playing right now.
Well, it was kind of a little bit of a slow start for Lebanon Trail. Lake Dallas, as you know, they were grinding out a couple of drives to start the game. That's the kind of the MO for Lake Dallas is they're going to grind out some drives. It's not going to be like one or two drives where they hit 50-yard bombs. They're going to kind of grind it out. The first drive, they got like 12, 13 plays, ended in a touchdown right there to get a 7-0 lead. Mm-hmm. And actually on the first play from scrimmage, Lake Dallas, they had some troubles, being able to grind out some big plays. Mm-hmm. Very first play from scrimmage, Lake Dallas gets like a 36-yard run from quarterback Trevor Moon. Mm-hmm. To move it into Lebanon Trail territory. And then after Lebanon Trail can't convert a fourth down on that next drive, Lake Dallas looks like it's about to go up 14-0. They get all the way to Lebanon Trail, like 2 or 3 yard line. Okay. But on 4th and goal, they instead of kicking a field goal, Lake Dallas realizes, this is going to probably be a higher scoring game right here. They go for it, and then they stop. Lebanon Trail stops them before the goal line. Mm-hmm. So that was just a huge swing of momentum. For sure. There. So after that, it was just all Lebanon Trail right there. Quarterback, Drew Martin, he was good with both his arm and his legs right there. He just one touchdown run. I think he got through 2 or 3 tackles, really? Like the 27-yard run, and then it was just once the goal line stand happened, it was just like Lebanon Trail got its legs, everything was going right there. So they tied the game up there late in the first quarter. The Drew to Drew connection right there.
Exactly, Martin to Donnelly.
That's right. They got going. Donnelly gets a 45-yard touchdown right there. He cleared a defender, and he's just got that track speed.
Does he? Okay.
Yeah, he finds that little vacant spot in the defense right there, bursts, and then he catches the ball, and that's another touchdown. Mm-hmm. In the first half, he could have probably had at least 3 touchdowns right there, just based on his speed, because he was just finding the open spots, and it was either like a big catch or Lake Dallas is having to commit a penalty in order to kind of impede his progress right there. So, it was 7-7, and then they just blew the game open. They had I think it was 24, they were up 24-7 at halftime right there. They got a field goal with no time left in the first half, and the field goal was actually kind of demonstrated how on point that Lebanon Trail was. Hits the upright, goes in.
Oh goodness!
Yeah,
one of those kicks.
Yeah, one of those kicks right there. So, They close out the first half with that, and then they go on to win 44-14. So they're 4-0 for the first time in program history right there. So obviously it's a big win. Coach Jackson said, he's trying to take it one game at a time right there. For sure. But right now it's a great start for them right there. I'm trying to look up the stats.
Yeah, you got a lot of papers that you're shuffling through right now.
Yes. I'm going old school right here, guys.
You have a laptop as well.
I know I have a laptop.
Consolidate.
But Drew Martin, he threw for 213 yards right there, and he also rushed for 66. And I also want to give one shout out to the running back Greg Hatley too. Okay. Lake Dallas actually made this a 2-touchdown game in the second half. They got a big play from their backup quarterback, Brendan Sorsby, to Henry Minifield. They hit him for like a 55-yard touchdown pass right there. So that made it a 2-possession game right there. And then Hatley scores on the next drive, and then that pretty much ices the game right there. So Hatley actually had 2 touchdowns there in the second half that really kind of, kept Lebanon Trail, ahead and kind of give them their separation to get away from Lake Dallas. So 4-0 start right there for Lebanon Trail with a big one coming up this week against Frisco.
Absolutely. Lebanon Trail making an early statement in 7-5A Division II. Same for Frisco Liberty. Devin, let's talk a little bit about the Red Hawks. They were the subject of our game of the week last week as they played Memorial in a game that's, it lived up to the billing. This was a very, very good game. A back-and-forth contest that you saw Memorial get off to a huge lead there in the, they hung, 44 points on them in the first half and just 7 in the second half. Ultimately, though, the story of this game, as I think is going to be the story for quite a few Liberty games this season, they've got something at quarterback that looks like it could be pretty special. This quarterback of theirs, Keldrick Luster, just a sophomore. He's making a case right now as the most statistically dominant quarterback in the area at the 5A level. And he just keeps on. We talked about him a lot last week on the podcast previewing this game. Just the video, the numbers that he's putting up right now they're straight out of a video game.
Yeah, and I was just going by, looking up because I wasn't at this game, obviously, but, going on Max Preps and see what the coaches entered. 21 of 23 for 338 yards and 2 touchdowns. Okay, that's incredibly efficient, number one. And obviously 21 completions for 338 yards. He's throwing the ball down the field. He's not deking and dunking necessarily a lot. Yeah. But then the other part, 24 carries for 266 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. That's more than 600 yards.
I know.
Total offense. And it's just for a guy like we talked about before we started, the podcast, a guy that kind of came out of nowhere in terms of being on the local landscape as far as players to watch. We talked about, I think in our season preview, we talked about Will Glatch being a returning starter at quarterback, an outstanding athlete. And Luster's been so good, they've been able to turn Glatch full-time on defense, where he's now a star. I believe leads him in tackles on defense.
Yeah. He's a great linebacker for them.
But just a guy that kind of, and I'm sure that the Liberty coaching staff might have kind of kept things under wraps and didn't want to kind of tip their hand too much before they had to. But everybody who follows high school football certainly knows who he is now, and I guarantee you that rest of the district is paying very close attention to how to contain this guy, because no one's been able to do it so far.
Because it's a case of, it's not just the raw numbers, but like you mentioned, it's just the efficiency, not just through the air, completing 85-90% of his passes, but just on the ground, over 11 yards per carry against Memorial. And he had 24 carries in that game, and I believe the next highest was just 9. So they've recalibrated their offense just around this kid's skill set, which just shows the confidence that Coach Swinney and the staff have in what he's shown so far. And it's led Liberty to a 3-1 start, their best start since 2010. Obviously, a big game in a couple weeks against Frisco. I'm epically fascinated to see any elite defense try and contain this kid, because when you look at just the abundance of weapons that he has around him, whether it's Jonathan Bone in the backfield, the receivers out wide with Evan Stewart, one of the top prospects in the state for the 2022 class, plus Connor Holstein, committed to Princeton, I believe. That offense has been lights out to begin the year. I don't know if Liberty could have ever envisioned that they would be getting this level of production so soon, but Luster was on fire, and that Memorial game, arguably his best showing to date of what's been an absolute breakout campaign for the sophomore.
Well, I was going to say, and think about if you're Memorial and their own quarterback, Ethan Lawler. He throws for 330 yards and 3 touchdowns. They put up 51 points, and it's somewhat overshadowed. But I think you look, if you're Memorial, you go back there and say, hey, look, we could put up points ourselves. We had a chance to win this game. Liberty kind of stole the spotlight a bit just because of that performance, because of the way they were able to come back and win that game. But Memorial's got to be thinking, hey, if we tweak a couple things, make a couple corrections, close stronger, we're going to be right in this thing as well.
In a sense, it's kind of a minor miracle when you look at how great Luster was. This was actually still a close game. That Memorial just didn't get run off the field entirely, because this is, as we talked about on the podcast, David, this has unfortunately kind of been the story of Memorial's season.
Close games.
They really do seem to just they're missing something when it comes to closing these games out. You saw it earlier in the year. You saw it the week before in the close loss against Lebanon Trail, and they're were just on fire, and they had a lot of kind of kitchen sink stuff go their way. They had a fake kick that led to a touchdown. They got a special teams score mixed in. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that really worked in their favor, and they had a lot working. I mean, they had 44 points and a half. I mean,
usually that's a win.
Yeah, it feels like, if you're just playing the probability game, it feels like that your odds of winning a game when you eclipse 40 points and a half has got to be, at least 80 to 90%. But not against Celtic Gloucester, man. It's they got something special over there at Liberty. Just the next great quarterback in Frisco ISD, at least early on it appears. Liberty's rolling right now. Same thing for Lovejoy. Talk about the Leopards a little bit, because this was a big game that they had last week. I think for my money, this was the best game on the marquee for 7-5A Division II, and they were heading up to Denison. It was, at least on paper, kind of their first big test of the season. I mean, Munson Stadium is a notoriously difficult place to play. Denison has probably the best run game in the district, you'd say, on paper, with Jadarian Price and Asa Osborne, and just stylistically, it's the kind of game that you would expect to maybe throw Lovejoy a little bit off kilter, just with their ability to kind of control the clock a little bit, and perhaps make Lovejoy. Because Lovejoy had they've been scoring at will in the 3 weeks prior, so a chance to see if you could kind of lure Lovejoy outside their comfort zone and see how they respond. And sure enough, this was the case. They were down 24-10 heading into the fourth quarter. I mean, about as far from what Lovejoy could have envisioned, just based on how the first 3 games had gone. And there you go. Lovejoy mounts that late push, gets 21 unanswered points, and they come back to beat Denison 31-24. Everything that could have gone wrong kind of did for Lovejoy early on. They throw a pick six, very uncharacteristic for that offense. But then you look in the fourth quarter, just everything kind of came together defensively. I don't think Denison picked up a first down over its final 5 possessions of the game. And then you had Lovejoy getting touchdowns from Philip Jost, their stud linebacker, who also works as kind of a goal line back. Ralph Rucker, Luke Mayfield was the one who caught the game-winning touchdown late. Just what resilience from Lovejoy. This is, again, just to kind of see how this team would respond when the offense finally hits a bit of a speed bump and isn't just able to just win these games comfortably, scoring 40-50 a game. And to actually see this team have to work through some adversity, that's big. And especially the job that they did defensively, even though they were playing at a deficit for a lot of the night, they did do a really good job bottling up that run game. They didn't let either Price or Osborne get over 100 yards. Denison only had 156 yards as a team. Instead, it was Noah Nadeau, Lovejoy's running back, who was the stud running back in this game. Just really, really impressive resilience from Lovejoy, who's 4-0 now, heading into their bye week. And they look the part as either, at least right now, I'd say if you're going to power rank them, probably number 2 behind Frisco. That seems like a realistic spot to put them after beating a team the caliber of Denison. But still a ways to go. I mean, this is shaping up to be a very, very fascinating district grind. And again, it continues on Friday with 2 of those unbeaten teams, Frisco and Lebanon Trail, squaring off. So some fun times going on over in 7-5A Division II.
Yeah, Frisco ISD is putting on quite a show right now.
Oh yeah, there's never a dull moment covering football in Frisco ISD for sure. Devin, let's talk a little bit about what you had going on last week with your coverage schedule. You were covering, was it Sachse on Friday?
Did have Sachse.
So with District 9-6A being in their first week, and somehow we have one of those teams in the district that still hasn't even played a game yet.
Yeah, actually 2.
Yeah.
District games anyway.
Yeah.
It's odd looking at the standings because you got Garland at 2-0. Yeah. Garland's actually been able to play the last 2 weeks, and then like I say, you have Rowlett not only at 0-0 in district, but 0-0 on the season. They had their season opener against Plano. That was.
What's that even going to feel like this week for this team? Like, to be this far into we're almost a month into the season, and Rowlett still hasn't even played a game. How many? Like, I know the pandemic is kind of affecting. It seems like everybody's being impacted in some form or fashion, with games getting rescheduled, canceled, and whatnot. But how many teams are up against it right now, like Rowlett, where you've had this many games fall through the cracks?
Well, and that's what I'm saying. I think Rowlett, none spring to mind, at least in the area and teams in our coverage areas and team in terms of. I mean, we've had several that have had games canceled, postponed,
absolutely,
or whatnot, but not to this extent. And I'm supposed to talk to Coach Stevens later this afternoon, just kind of because it is finally game week. But I know the coaching staff has tried to treat it every week as is game week. You go through the same preparations building toward Thursday or Friday nights. Mm-hmm. But it's tough. It's got to be tough on those kids.
Absolutely.
Because we're not just talking about we're talking about going all the way back to August. I mean, everybody's had to deal with the month, but they basically, in their mind, they were sitting there, okay, August 28th, August 29th, that was week 1. Mm-hmm. And now here we are almost a Halloween, and they still haven't taken the field. So yeah, it's going to be interesting as far as that goes. Rowlett this week. Sachse had been through a little bit of that themselves. They played Coppell 2 weeks ago in their season opener, and then they had their game against Rowlett last week, which was postponed. So this was only their second game of the season. So they're trying to kind of shake off some rust. As well, we talked about Alex Orji a couple weeks ago, and his debut against Coppell was a successful one. They played North Garland, a North Garland team that got beat by Garland 42-0 last week. Sachse wins this game 41-7. Kind of an uneventful game, to be honest with you. It's kind of a methodical performance by Sachse. They ended up gaining over 400 yards, but it was one of those games. It looked, Sachse was in control, and they didn't have to push, and it just looked like it. I think North Garland had minus 6 yards rushing through three quarters. I mean, Sachse just dominated the line of scrimmage, and therefore they were able to dominate field position. So a lot of their, Alex Orji had 3 rushing touchdowns, but a lot of them were smaller, shorter runs. Corey Jones had a nice long touchdown run. They did get a kickoff return from James Adams. It's just one of those things where you could tell from the onset that Sachse was in control, and they weren't going to do too much to give North Garland any hope or let them hang around. And so, Sachse takes care of business. They go to 1-0. Again, we're technically 2 weeks in since Garland has played 2 games. But there's only been a total of 5 district games played because Wiley's in the same boat as Rowlett. Yeah. Even though Wiley got a couple of non-district games in, they've also had the COVID protocol where they've missed the first 2 weeks of district. So they, like Rowlett, will be playing their 9-6A opener this week. So it's really kind of hard to get a gauge on how this district is going to go. Garland has been really impressive. That win over Damon Forest was a solid one last week, coming through in the last second. They've talked about that. It was now a junior class since they were freshmen over at Garland with Sergio Perez at quarterback and Jay Sean Powers at running back, and they have several good receivers, Jordan Hudson, Charles Allen, Ellis Rogers. I don't know if y'all saw the highlights of that.
No,
at the very end against Damon Forest, it was tied, and it was Ellis Rogers, I believe, and they threw it down a sideline route, and he goes up with a defender, and he falls to his back, and somehow he kicks it up to himself as it's about to hit the ground. He's able to grab it. It's a really phenomenal catch.
Really?
But it led to the game-winning touchdown, so they win 14-7. So Garland looks like it's going to be right there. Lakeview played South Garland last week, and again, that was actually 14-12 at the half, which was a little bit surprising. No Kamar Wheaton, don't know the story there. A lot of people rate him as the best running back, not just in the state, but in the country. So they go to Zechariah Dunstan. He decides to rush for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns.
That helps.
They pull away. So, Lakeview's off to that 1-0 start. Again, Rowlett and Wiley open this week. They both kind of got scheduling breaks. Rowlett has North Garland on Thursday. Wiley has South Garland on Friday. So they don't necessarily jump right into the fray against one of the major contenders for the district title. They kind of have a week against. In games they'll be favored in to kind of break in, get back into rhythm. So, we'll see. A couple good ones on coming up. Sachse and Garland on Thursday in a game that all of a sudden, may not have jumped off the schedule, a month ago. But here's 2 of the, teams that are undefeated that actually play games. And we mentioned a couple weeks ago with the pod system that they're doing as well.
For sure.
And, we hope that this doesn't come into play. We hope that these teams are able to play a full schedule and that the playoff field will be set as normal. But in case there are further cancellations, in case there are further issues, Garland ISD, or I should say 9-6A, did adopt a pod system where they played some in 2 14 pods, and they're going to play the first 3 games, I should say, against one another. That way they have kind of a seeding system set in case they just need to do play-in games between those pods. And so one pod is Rowlett, Sachse, Garland, and North Garland. So these first 3 games are really important in terms of seeding and trying to get those matchups. Same thing with Naaman Forest and Lakeview playing a big game this week. They're part of the same pod. So all these early district matchups in 9-6A are big, potentially big in terms of seeding if things with COVID, if they get hit with that again later on.
So for right now, though, even though obviously it sounds like there's still it's no lack of chaos over in 9-6A right now as they try to sort through all this. You have District 5-6A, which starts later on this week, and it feels like things have been fairly seamless so far. I mean, of course, you have had 3 of the teams have been under a bit of a quarantine shutdown on the back end of their non-district schedules with Allen, Geyer, and Prosper. One of those teams, though, that I was able to see from 5-6A say, on Thursday was Boyd out in McKinney. McKinney Boyd, as they were looking to get their first win, get a little bit of momentum heading into district. And the big question heading into this one is this going to be the game when Boyd's offense finally just shows some signs of life? They had, through their first 3 games, they had not scored an offensive touchdown in 2 of them. They were shut out against Rockwall Heath the week prior, 38-0. So yeah, just all eyes to see on what Boyd's offense could do. They had a season high in points scored. 14.
I was going to say, yeah.
So I mean, it's still a work. It's still a work in progress on the offensive side of the ball of the Broncos, but they did get enough defensively and on special teams to keep Byron Nelson within striking distance, and then ultimately win this game in overtime, 14-7. It was, the big story, at least offensively, was, they're a little banged up right now, and they obviously that necessitated digging to the depth chart at quarterback, and they were rolling with their backup Ryan Shackleton in place of Carter Whitefield, who had a giant cast on his right arm, and they actually still used Whitefield, though. I mean, again, the cast was to where you can't throw a football, but you can still carry a football, still catch a football, so they still used him as a running back, a little bit in the second half in a role that I think they're looking to, kind of expand for him, as he's still a terrific athlete, even if he's not able to, use his arm at quarterback as such. But with Shackleton, they actually, they did get, at least up to this point, would have been their best game as far as passing yardage goes as a team and whatnot. And it looked, it was definitely a much more crisp product offensively than it had been. And eventually, again, they got enough there late to pull out, to pull away in overtime, and it was surprisingly enough. It took them, they scored 7 points in all of regulation, and then in overtime, it takes them just 2 plays to find the end zone.
Naturally.
Oh yeah, I believe it was Brooks Rigney who was on the receiving end of, I believe, a 24-yard touchdown pass from Shackleton to put them up 14-7, and then in Nelson's back half of the overtime frame, they just do nothing but go backwards and eventually turn it over on downs, and that's been kind of the constant though. Again, we got to see what becomes of this offense with Boyd. The defense has been outstanding, though, to start the year. Only they're allowing less than 12 points per game so far, and a lot of that on Thursday centered on the efforts of their linebacking core, specifically Matteo Bianchi, who's been one of the breakout stars on defense in the area, and he was just he was a human highlight reel against Byron Nelson. Was 15, 16 tackles. I want to say 6 of them were for a loss. He had multiple sacks, multiple forced fumbles, including one where he just straight up ripped the ball away from the ball carrier. The only other time, David, and you'll remember this, the only other time I think I've ever seen that happen in a game was back in the 2004 AFC divisional game between the Patriots and the Colts when Teddy Bruschi did it to Dominic Rhodes. And again, it was literally just, he didn't even tackle him. He just literally reached in, just grabbed the football away from him, and then returned it into Nelson territory. Just such an impressive display of strength there from Bianchi. And then on that last drive there in overtime, he had a sack on 3rd down, which put them back in 4th and 1,000,000, and they weren't able to make up the ground there. So he's been awesome. He was on special teams too. He blocked a field goal. This kid was all over the place and looking like a real potential defensive player of the year candidate over in 5-6A. It was but nevertheless, just some really, really impressive resilience from Boyd, who was actually in position to win this game at the end of regulation. It was a very windy game out at McKinney ISD Stadium, and they actually had a pretty short field to work with after a short punt by Nelson. They were actually able to get down inside the 10-yard line, but then had a field goal blocked, which sent this one to overtime. So impressive resilience by Boyd to get their first win. Obviously, you need as much momentum as you can get heading into that district schedule because it's going to be tough. They've got a really, really tall order coming up on Thursday when they welcome Braswell, who's been, you talk about two teams on the stylistic opposites on the offensive spectrum. You have Braswell, who's putting up the best numbers offensively in program history. I believe they're actually leading the area, at least as far as total points scored so far.
They're averaging over 600 yards a game.
Oh yeah, it's insane. They got like 2 of the top 5 receivers in the area. Their run game, I think their running game and passing game are both ranked number 2 in the area right now. They're on fire. Of course, they're getting into a ton of shootouts, so they're having a tough time getting stops and whatnot. So it'll just be a very, very interesting interesting stylistic challenge with high-octane offense versus a shutdown defense in Boyd. But it sounds like for the time being, though, Shackleton's going to be the guy quarterback. Whitefield, Coach McBride didn't have a specific timeline on how long he thinks he's going to be out for, but did say that it's going to be a while. So they're Shackleton, I believe, just a sophomore. So he's going to be the quarterback for the foreseeable future. It'll be interesting to see how Whitefield's role grows in the backfield as a potential complement alongside Jay Thompson, their starting running back. But just some nice momentum for Boyd heading into district play. So let's talk a little bit about that district though before we close this thing out. We'll look at we can talk at the end about the Mesquite ISD district over in 10-6A as they get rolling this week with 5-6A. They start so far, and I kind of we kind of have an idea as to where the top three teams are. Now, I don't know what order, but it feels like so far Allen, Geyer, and Prosper have shown enough to kind of separate themselves from the pack. It does stink because, as I mentioned, all three had really big games that got canceled by COVID reasons. So it's opportunities that deny you a chance to really kind of test yourself and compete against a high level opponent. Just because I think those are the games more than the others that will kind of really flesh out your strengths and weaknesses and just show you what stuff needs to be corrected against a high-level opponent before you get ready for that district grind. With Allen, they missed out on games. They actually lost out on their last two games of non-district. They didn't get to play against Cedar Hill, which after what Cedar Hill did against Aledo, man, who would not have loved to see that Allen-Cedar Hill matchup now in hindsight? But then you had, they didn't get to play against Tyler Legacy last week. So, Allen's in a situation right now where, again, all eyes are on that November 13th matchup against Geyer, which, is at least theoretically could be for the district championship. They open district at the end of the month, October 30th, against Boyd. Then they play Little Elm. So there's a scenario where they're going to get to that game against Geyer without really having faced any adversity. Yeah. They didn't really face any adversity against Plano East or Atascocita. As good as Atascocita is, it's still a really young team that really wasn't in much of a position to do a whole lot against Allen. So there's still a lot about this Allen team that we don't know, and we probably won't know until they line up against Geyer, which, I don't know what to make of that. At least with Geyer, even though they had a really big game against South Lake Carroll fall through last week, they did have that game against Ryan earlier in the year that they lost 23-20. I guarantee Geyer learned more about itself losing that game against Ryan than Allen did, in blowing out Atascocita and Plano East. So it's just one more subplot for that game, November 13th, where the district title could very well be on the line. Prosperous had a really, really impressive start. They had a huge win over Euless Trinity before having to go on a bit of a COVID shutdown of their own, which meant not being able to play its final non-district games against DeSoto, which would have been, a great test. DeSoto looks like, I don't know, that might be the best team in the area right now. For all who knows, they're just beating the brakes off everybody. And then they also missed out on a game against Arlington Lamar, another game that really could have tested them heading into district play. So, again, though, it feels like just based on the early results that those three have shown enough to kind of separate themselves from the pack. For that fourth spot, I think right now, again, we know Allen, Geyer, Prosper, those games between any of those three are going to be big. And actually, you get one next week, I believe, is when Prosper plays Geyer. So that's going to be a real nice test as far as kind of gauging where those two are at. Braswell and McKinney is the one, though, that I have my eye on. That game is going to be, let's see, I got it written down somewhere. It's going to be, I can't find it. Let's see. So, yeah, that game, though, again, we talked about Braswell as far as being a team that just is, they're scoring at will against everybody. With McKinney, though, it's kind of been it's November 13th that they play. Sorry, I was lost somewhere in this cluster of notes that I have. With McKinney, they've been on the complete opposite end. They play great defense, which is kind of the case you saw last season with them. They're allowing, since having Plano hung, when Plano hung 35 on them in their opener, a game that head coach Marcus Shavers kind of attributed to them. He felt like the kids kind of wore down a bit in the second half. They weren't as well conditioned as they had to be for that game. Well, since then, they've only allowed 18 points per game, and that includes a game against Marcus, who's projected to win District 6A. So that defense is starting to round into form. They've got this bruising run game led by R.J. Carver, who's been great to start the season. So, again, it's this Braswell team that can, just sling it all over the place versus a McKinney team that's going to employ more of a ball control style approach. That should be a fascinating game in mid-November to potentially determine the last playoff team from that district. With Little Elm, they've shown they're 2-2. It could have been 3-1. They had they stumbled a bit late there against Fossil Ridge. I believe they were denied just outside the goal line in that game. But they looked really, really solid the week prior against Plano West. Now, Plano West, not necessarily the caliber of what they're going to be seeing in the upper echelon of 5-6A, but, they've at least handled the transition to 6A, fairly well so far. Now, again, it's about to ramp up a bit with the start of district play, but, they do have what is, at least on paper, the most experienced roster of anybody in the district, I believe, with 17 or 18 returning starters. They've got their quarterback, John Mateer, who's been starting since he was a freshman, and you're really starting to kind of see that experience really kind of pay dividends now as he's kind of gone up a level in his junior season. And the defense has been really, really solid. Their defensive line especially really impressed me against Plano West. Again, we'll see what it means as far as facing those juggernaut offenses over in 5-6A. And with Boyd, it's all going to be about the offense. I feel like the defense is going to be pretty steady the rest of the way. Don't know if they'll be holding teams under 12 points per game or whatever clip they've been so far. But if Shackleton's able to develop a bit more of a comfort at quarterback, and this offense can just get up somewhere in like the 20s. It's not, you don't have to score 40 a game and whatnot. Just give your defense, because it's also going to be good as far as you have to be able just to sustain drives if you're Boyd's offense, just to keep your defense healthy and fresh and not just wear them out as the game goes along. Because they're going to be they got some tall orders on deck with with Braswell this week, and then I believe they play Allen the week after. So that's you have to do everything you can to try to keep your defense fresh, just to give them some sort of chance in the second half of these games. So it's all going to boil down to how Boyd's offense is able to grow and just try to at least muster some sort of identity that can at least make them some semblance of a threat to potentially qualify for the playoffs out of 5-6A. So yes, that district gets going later on this week. We've also got some action going on over in 10-6A with Mesquite ISD. So Devin, what do we as we close out the podcast here? What is just kind of your early read on where this district is going to be headed?
If you look at record-wise, there's two pretty distinct tiers that have been established so far. Rockwall Heath, and Tyler Legacy. I think coming in, they were the favorites. They had more. The other teams had more questions. They're all 3-1. We really can't complain about in their losses. Rockwall last week, a little bit of a surprise. Not losing to Highland Park, but the way they lost.
Got handled pretty seamlessly.
They fell behind early, and I think they may have panicked. I wasn't at the game. I'm just following along updates. But, teams like Rockwall, who are used to dominating, aren't used to being on the other side of things, and I think they might have just let things get out of control, and that was a 46-18 final. But they still have been impressive otherwise from a 3-1 start.
Yeah, Southlake.
Yeah, exactly. And Heath, rolled last week over McKinney North. They're 3-1. Their only loss was they had a shootout. Southlake loss, I think 72-57 was that final. And then Tyler Legacy, a team that it's kind of hard to compare because early in the season they play a lot of East Texas schools. Well, they played Pulaski, Little Rock last week.
Is Pulaski are they still the Pulaski of old?
Yes, and they had I guess they were supposed to play Allen. Was that what it was? Tyler Legacy?
Yes, Tyler Legacy was supposed to play Allen, yes.
And they lost 50-25, but they hung with them early on. And so, no shame in taking on a national power and being able to be competitive. So I think those three teams at 3-1 was kind of the consistency early on that they would be the top three, and it was be a matter of if you can break into that group. Mesquite was thought to have a chance. Mesquite's 0-3, a couple of tough losses. They got a couple of 2 and 3 point losses. They were off last week. I think Mesquite will be fine. Horn's the one that I think kind of opened some eyes last week. They beat John Tyler 41-27. Not necessarily the fact that they beat John Tyler, but the fact that they had a first game starter in Darius White, quarterback. They've been kind of unsettled to positions. They tried a couple different guys. Darius White's a junior. They put him in. He goes 9-15 for 281 and 4 touchdowns, and also rushes for a touchdown. So, and I was just looking back over. You talk about big plays. Number one, they get an 87-yard kickoff return from Charles Demings. White's touchdown run was 25 yards. So then you have Xavier Brown, who had 3 catches. They all go for touchdowns, 38, 54, 71 yards.
Wow.
And then Camden Tyler has a 34-yard touchdown. So all 6 of their touchdowns were 25 yards or longer. And so if they could continue that kind of big play potential, again, they were way up. They were up 21-3 after the one quarter. Kind of mistakes started settling. They turned the ball over a couple times in the third quarter, let John Tyler hang around. But got the ship righted in the fourth quarter, was able to close it out. And an important game for Horn is just in their second season under Chris Hudler. If they can find, a quarterback that runs that system, that's going to put them right there. Real curious to see, what they can do going forward. Skyline actually had a nice win. They're going to be they're a newcomer to the Mesquite Rockwall grouping, but they rallied past Keller last week to win 34-32. It's just so hard when you look at that district because you got Braden Locke over at Rockwall, you got Josh Hoover, quarterback over at Rockwall Heath, and Tyler Legacy's more of a run oriented with Jamarian Miller in that group, but they've all three of those teams are proven. It's see if one of those others can break into the upper echelon. Positive sign for Horn. Mesquite, despite the 0-3 start, has a lot going for them. They're going to be right there in the thick of things. Skyline showed that they're going to be a player with last week's win, and again, this is one of the last districts to start. So we will see what happens. I think the Rockwall teams are the teams to beat right now. Tyler Legacy, need to clarify since not many people know. Yeah. If I say Legacy, Mansfield's in that district. And so, they're going to be a factor as well. So, we'll see what happens. But they finally get started this week. Is
this the week we get Rockwall versus Heath?
I believe so. Yes. I'm shifted more toward the Horn North Mesquite angle.
Oh, I know. I'm just curious if you had to guess like an over/under. Is that game over under 4 hours long?
I would say over, and I would set the over/under at 110 points as well. But it would be fun. I mean, not for deadline purposes, but just from a sheer entertainment fan standpoint, that game is going to be wild.
So, yes, that is a look at what is going on as we have everybody's going to be in the full swing of district play by the end of the week. And, yes, it should be fun. The battle for district titles and playoff berths is officially in full swing. So, yes, that'll do it for this episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. We'll be back on Thursday to look at some of the marquee games on our coverage schedule, including our reader-voted game of the week. Make sure you go to our website, starlocalmedia.com, to vote on one of the 5 games up for contention. So, until then, folks, you take care. And we will talk to y'all later.